Bere, no escuchamos el audio.
Ya, sí.
Hello. Oh, okay.
¿Puedes repetirlo?
Right. We'll be right there for an after-school pick-me-up. And money is no issue. The first one is on us. But don't forget our most valued customers. The ones who have given so much of themselves. All we want are people who are willing to give us everything. There's no secret, really. We just need something to keep them hooked. The very end.
Hi, Mr. Wonderful here. You know, I don't.
Buenos días, bienvenidas a todos y todas a este webinar. Les
Everyone, be welcome to this webinar. We are very thankful that you are joining us this morning, and it's a great pleasure to have you with us in the webinar From Attraction to Deception, Unmasking the Tobacco Industry Product Design and Digital Tactics. Now we will begin with some logistic messages so that you can know everything and take everything into account as we move forward in this webinar. Please, let's go to the next slide. You may have already received some of this information. This webinar has been organized in the framework of the World No Tobacco Day 2025, which is called Bright Products, Dark Intentions, Unmasking the Appeal. And we will be speaking about the strategies used by the industry when designing their products to attract children and the youth to use these products. As you see on screen, flavor is sometimes the reason why these companies succeed in attracting the youth and children, and how these strategies are designed by them. This material was also shared during the campaign in the last days of the month of May, and as you see, on May the 31st, we celebrate World No Tobacco Day. In this webinar, you should know that we will record the session, that now everyone in charge of the recording, please start recording. And you should also know that simultaneous interpretation is available in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. You will see in the menu on screen a small globe. You can click that to choose interpretation and choose the language of your choice. If anything is not working properly, you might need to update your Zoom version, and you might need to update the version or application in your device. You should also know that in this webinar, we will be able to do some Q&A questions using the box and menu of the Q&A in Zoom. You can include your questions and comments there for the speakers, and you may also make questions about the logistics of the webinar or the organization of the webinar, anything that you might need to know. We are seeing already your comments in the chat. You are introducing yourselves. Thank you for that. Now, to speak about some of the objectives of this morning's webinar, mainly, we would like to raise awareness among PAHO member states, civil society organizations, and academic institutions joining us this morning within the framework of World No Tobacco Day 2025 about how the tobacco and nicotine industries use product design and digital marketing to target youth, threatening decades of progress in public health. We would also like to expose industry's deceptive narratives, emphasizing how their product design and digital marketing strategies defy the rights of children and youth to health. As a third point, we would also like to share the key mandates and evidence-based guidelines to address digital marketing practices by the tobacco and nicotine industries, including the updated guidelines for implementing WHO FCTC Article 13, which emphasized the importance of comprehensive bans on advertising, promotion, and sponsorship. And finally, to spotlight the regional experiences, on the one side to expose how these products are designed and what are the digital marketing strategies, and on the other hand, to get to know some of the activities led by the youth that are promoting positive change in the region. We would also like to thank the help of some of the government delegates, which act as focal points for the WHO FCTC, the Ministries of Health, many representatives of the National Coordinating Mechanisms for Tobacco Control, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation Department, and other collaborators with the FCTC. We would also like to thank focal points of our country offices for PAHO and the WHO, and we also have organizations of civil society that are collaborating with PAHO here today. As you see on screen, you might also have already checked the schedule in the website, and you will also receive information in the chat where we will share the event's website, and you will be able to see the schedule and some materials that we will share today. Our agenda today is divided in 3 sections. The first one is what we are doing now. It's our welcome. Then we have very important presentations. The first one is by the University of George Washington. And then we have also a presentation by the chief of the Non-Communicable Diseases and Mental Health Department of the PAHO. And then we will also have some youth voices in the region that will expose some strategies of the industry, but also to let us know about some of the actions that they are taking in the region. I would also like to have you listen to a message by Dr. Jarbas Barbosa, the director of the Pan American Health Organization. Berenice, if you can please share our director's message, please.
estamos escuchando, Bere. Por favor, si puede repetir.
We cannot hear the video. Vera, can you please play it back?
Disculpen, tenemos un pequeño problema de audio.
Apologies, we are having a small audio problem. I will stop sharing my screen and play the video once again. Please let me know if you can hear it properly.
Ahora sí.
Tobacco using and nicotine addictions are serious threats to the health of young and the youth and children. The tobacco industry has products with bright colors and attractive flavors, creating a false essence and sensation of glamour and safety. Today, on May 31st, the Pan American Health Organization is celebrating World No Tobacco Day under the theme Unmasking the Appeal, Bright Products and Dark Intentions, to denounce the industry strategies that aim to manipulate children and use products that are attractive but extremely harmful. The most common industry tactics include designs that mimic candy and children's cartoon characters, flavor and additives, and highly targeted advertising campaigns on digital platforms, social networks, and events such as concerts and sports competitions. These tactics are used for both conventional and emerging products, such as e-cigarettes, which are consumed by young people in particular. Cigarettes are used among 13 to 15 years old, increasing at an alarming rate, and is higher than adult use in all regions. Studies show that young people who use cigarettes are almost 3 times more likely to start smoking conventional cigarettes. For this reason, the industry invests aggressively in advertising promotion and sponsorship to attract new customers, increase consumption, discourage quitting, and encourage relapse. Worldwide, tobacco continues to cost more than $8 million each year, and nearly 1 million of these deaths occur in a region. Given these challenges, we applaud the leadership of member states in adopting comprehensive evidence-based tobacco and nicotine control policies free of conflict of interest. Thanks to these decisive actions, the prevalence of tobacco use among adults has been on a steady downward trend since the year 2000. In 2024 alone, we have several examples of achievements made, for example, in Colombia, that have expanded its legislation to include electronic cigarettes in emerging tobacco and nicotine products. Peru has expanded its legislation on smoke-free environments to include cigarettes and became the first country in the Americas to enact a total ban on advertising, promotion, and sponsorship of tobacco. Mexico and Brazil reaffirmed their commitment to maintain their ban on the commercialization of emerging products. Flavors and additives in tobacco and industry products have been effectively regulated, and all forms of advertising, promotion, and sponsorship, with no exceptions, have been banned, as well as the consumption in public places and public transportation, in line with the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control of the WHO. Together, let's protect children and the youth, and let's build societies free of tobacco and nicotine.
Muchas gracias por pasar el video.
Thank you very much.
Les haya gustado este mensaje por parte del...
Okay, thank you for this video. Thank you for listening to this message of Dr. Barbosa, PAHO's director. I would like to introduce Vanessa Garcia Larsen, the head of non-communicable diseases in the PAHO, WHO. Vanessa, you have the floor. Thank you, Diana.
Welcome, dear colleagues, partners, and friends. It is a great pleasure to welcome you all to our webinar From Attraction to Deception, Unmasking the Tobacco Industry's Product Design and Digital Tactics. Today, we are delighted to be joined by representatives from government agencies, non-state actors in official relations with PAHO, WHO, collaborating centers, civil society organizations, and academia from across the region of the Americas. Under the framework of the World No Tobacco Day 2025, this webinar aims to discuss the deliberate and deceptive strategies employed by the tobacco and nicotine industries, particularly in product design and digital marketing that target children and youth. Our distinguished speakers will provide a human rights perspective to the industry's misleading narratives, such as the so-called harm reduction, to shape perceptions and drive youth consumption. We will also explore how these deceptive practices have been adapted to the digital environment. From influencer marketing, targeted ads on social media, these strategies continue to circumvent regulation and reach young audiences with disturbing effectiveness. We will also discuss how comprehensive bans on tobacco advertisement, promotion, and sponsorship, including those that are cross-border and digital, remain among the most effective measures to prevent these tactics. This includes expanding the scope of such measures to address emerging tobacco and nicotine products. In line with the World No Tobacco Day 2025 campaign, this webinar provides a platform to disseminate the urgent call for the adoption of robust national legislation for strengthened international collaboration and in enforcement, and for greater accountability from the tobacco and nicotine industries. Importantly, you will also hear from youth voices across our region, the powerful role in exposing the industry's insidious tactics and their call for policies that protect the rights to the highest attainable standards of health. I would like to take this opportunity to thank you all for your continued dedication in observing World No Tobacco Day each year on May the 31st. And for the work you do in your countries and organizations to advance tobacco control. We hope that today's session offers valuable insights and practical tools to continue our collective efforts to protect children and youth from the harms of tobacco and nicotine. Thank you all again for joining us today, and I wish you a productive and inspiring discussion.
Muchas gracias, Vanessa. Buenos días con todos, colegas.
Thank you, Vanessa. Welcome, everyone, to the 447 participants that we have today. For some colleagues who have been asked again about interpretation, I would like to remind you that you can click on the bottom section where you have 3 dots where it says more or más if you have it in Spanish, and then click on interpretation. You can select the language that you would like to listen to. You can also select the original audio in the language that you would like to select or the language that you would like to listen to. So today, we celebrate the acknowledgement of organizations, civil society, and journalists from several countries across the region, from Canada, Ecuador, the United States, Mexico, Peru, and Uruguay, as well as governmental organizations from Brazil who have been acknowledged with the award of No Tobacco Day of 2025 from the World Health Organization. It's our pleasure from the regional team against tobacco to celebrate all these people who have devoted their lives against tobacco and are acknowledged. First of all, shared award for Christian Curtis and Memoria. They have been awarded acknowledging their service on long-standing trajectory of research and promotion of policy controls. Anvisa Brazil, the national agency for health surveillance in Brazil, who has had an outstanding work in tobacco control in pioneer regulations. In 2024, they reaffirmed the guidelines against e-cigarettes in Brazil. Shared award to Colectivo Todas y Todos en Acción Jurídica Popular from Ecuador. They were awarded jointly because of spearheading physical policies and incidence policies. Shared award to 3 organizations for education and support in Mexico, and also from Peru and Sudestada from Uruguay. They were awarded because of their research and journalism of the incidence of tobacco industry in public policies. Shared award to the economy ministries and health ministries from Brazil. They were awarded because of their efforts to ensure the measured control against tobaccos, mainly fiscal policy aligned with the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control of the WHO in the context of the tax reform. Awarded to Lisa Liu from the US, awarded because of her leadership against tobacco among the youth. So let us applaud them virtually because of their dedication and their success in their fight against tobacco. So let us listen to the main video of the campaign of the World No Tobacco Day.
Parece que la tecnología el día de hoy no nos está ayudando mucho. No tenemos
Technology is
volumen.
not on our side. We cannot hear it. I don't know if we can try again to listen to the video. Thank you. Okay. So we are having some technical difficulties for the video. So I'll just give the floor to Diana for the next part of the webinar, and then we'll see the video. Or we'll share it later on through a link. So it's a wonderful video. Diana, go ahead. Thank you. We apologize for the difficulties, but we'll continue with today's agenda because we have a very interesting agenda and little time to share everything. So the second section, we'll have 2 presentations. The first one, it's Selling Damage as Hope. It's a human rights perspective on the tobacco industry, which will tackle some of the practices of the tobacco and nicotine industry, especially how they use the narrative of harm reduction and how they violate human rights, especially the health right of children and the youth. This is a clear opportunity to highlight the importance to adopt a human rights perspective in policy controls of control policies of tobacco. This presentation will be delivered by Oscar Cabrera, Isabel Barbosa. Oscar Cabrera is the Director of Health and Human Rights of the Global Center of Legal Innovation on Food Affairs in the O'Neill Institute on the Georgetown University. And Isabel Barbosa is the Associate Director of this initiative and professor of the Law School and the Civil University. Then afterwards, we'll have presentation by Ben, which will be introduced at that point. This presentation will be about digital marketing tactics. And then we'll have a comment by Gustavo Sonora, Regional Director for Latin American Vital and Vital Strategies. And then on section 3, we'll have Janela Severini, representing Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, and Jaime Arcila from Corporate Accountability, to share some of the experiences by the youth of our region. Without further ado, I'll give the floor to Oscar and Isabel for their presentation. Thank you very much for everything. Thank you. Thank you, Diana. And thank you to PAHO for their invitation. With Oscar, we'll address the human rights perspective, as Diana was saying, and the contributions of the legal framework of the human rights to tobacco control. Oscar, I'll give you the floor. Thank you. I had some connection issues too. I'll share the presentation. I would like to thank PAHO and WHO for their invitation. And it's an honor to be able to address this topic with a human rights perspective. So now I'll give the floor to Isabel, and then I will make comments. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Oscar. So the presentation will be divided into 3 parts. We'll start with some considerations on tobacco and nicotine in the context of non-communicable diseases, and then we'll discuss the legal framework of human rights and how it was addressed on tobacco control. And then we'll discuss damage reduction, which was mentioned during the opening remarks in the PAHO. And then the legal framework from the human rights perspective, highlighting the recent progress that shed light on this topic. So, on the first part of the presentation, in the context of prevention of non-communicable diseases, examples of NCDs are cardiovascular diseases, chronic respiratory diseases, and cancer, among other diseases. And then we consider health from the preventive perspective, emphasizing recent developments in the legal framework of human rights. So this is a dimension that we would like to point out so that we are all on the same page.
Siempre empezar destacando también es el hecho de
And the
que
other factor that we always like to highlight are analytical frameworks, which have informed the development of human rights regulations, especially when related to health. These human rights frameworks many times speak about social determinants of health, and at the same time, the academia and international organizations such as the PAHO or the WHO have developed many documents related to determinants of health. Social determinants of health, which is this idea that our society can provide us with a better or a worse chance to have a much healthier life. This includes the place where we are born and different factors. And recently, we have also developed another concept based on these determinants of health, which is commercial determinants of health. And this includes the role of the private and commercial stakeholders. When we speak about, for example, the tobacco industry, we can think about how these stakeholders and the development of their products also shape our life and give us a better or worse chance at having a healthy life. And finally, regulations and laws in our country are constantly influencing our surrounding and environment. So this includes social aspects, commercial aspects, and now also legal aspects in tobacco control. Now, again, referring to emerging products, both tobacco and nicotine products, we are looking into these with a lens of commercial determinants of health, and we are seeing how tobacco companies have created enticing strategies, and they have all used strategies that we have already documented and observed in tobacco control. Now we were able to expose advertising and promotion in social networks and digital marketing platforms. These companies are targeting their marketing strategies to the youth and children to incorporate and introduce emergency tobacco and nicotine products. So we need to keep in mind these strategies and also keep in mind our human rights frameworks work in relation to these issues. Well, you have covered many of the most important topics that we needed to discuss. And one thing that we also need to highlight is the necessary dialogue in the human rights framework that relates evidence with the actions made by the governments and by the state. These are not static actions because we are all the time adapting to how these products emerge and how these tactics evolve. So we need all the time to comply with some processes and evidence, but also take into account this constant evolution. Thank you very much, Oscar. Now, speaking about human rights regulation frameworks, we need to establish a relationship between governments, the states, and individuals and collectives. In this relationship, we have divided collectives also as subjects of human rights. And we have also highlighted on the other side some rights that include obligations and duties to the state, from the state, to individuals and collectives. These are two important axes in human rights frameworks. The rights themselves, and on the other side, the obligations and duties that emerge from those rights. And this is very relevant when we think about companies and private tobacco stakeholders. We will speak further about how this gets manifested in the obligations and duties that are also under the states and the government's scope. Many of these human rights are based on the right to health, also in the rights of the youth and children. And we also need to be reminded about the interrelationship between human rights, because it's very difficult otherwise to speak about only one right. For example, the right to health. We need to interrelate a series of rights so that this problem can be really addressed. The right to life, the right to equality and non-discrimination, the right to information, which also has a very important role in tobacco control, and the protection to health, which requires a very broad view. This interrelationship is fundamental to address this problem at all levels. On the other hand, we will also speaking about obligations that the government has. And these obligations have different levels in the human rights framework. First of all is the obligation to respect, then the obligation to protect human rights, and finally the obligation to guarantee human rights. The obligation to respect implies that the government itself cannot violate human rights. The obligation to protect is the government acting so that third parties do not breach human rights. And finally, the obligation to guarantee is their action with other private, for example, private sector actors such as tobacco companies, where the government needs to protect the population against the activities of companies such as tobacco companies. There is no reason why this actor, being a private stakeholder, shouldn't be included in the human rights framework. The government has the obligations and duties to regulate companies. And finally, in this guarantee of human rights, the state and the government needs to implement many efforts to make progress in the enjoyment of human rights by the whole population. So this helps us see how the private sector is included in this human rights framework and in these relations. This is not only included in an abstract level, but this also is very important in the prevention of non-communicable diseases and in the prevention of tobacco use. We have seen different statements, but different organizations and human rights actors that make this relationship between these governmental obligations and very specific actors that have important roles in tobacco control. For example, here we have a statement by the Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which speaks very explicitly about the issue. We have also seen some hearings by these organizations where the issue was raised to address how tobacco companies hinder human rights. And also, for example, the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination against Women, or for example, in children organizations that speak more specifically, including also their human rights perspectives. Something that we would also like to highlight is a report by the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights in 2024. It's a very recent and updated report that includes economic, social, cultural, and environmental rights. And this is one of the few reports that includes non-communicable diseases with a human rights perspectives. And in this report, you will also see a very close reporting and information on tobacco control. You will also see a lot of regulations and a lot of measures that you might be interested in. So we really and highly recommend you to check this report. Isa, I just wanted to add 2 comments. One is that even if since 15 to 20 years, we had already the Framework Convention, we are now in a context where regulations have been clearly developed in the Inter-American and Universal System. Regulations that are not only including the health sector, but also human rights organizations. The thing is, there is no lack of regulations. We have the regulations that have been created by different actors and stakeholders. We can even share them with you if you are interested. We have here also some of the reporters that have worked on many of these reports. And the other thing is that tobacco control has been the pioneer to set a path for other diseases and for other controllers. The tobacco control has already acted on companies, on the public sector. We have created also reports for the CDH that is very helpful in the sense that it includes measures that help when the government can no longer act or sometimes is not able to or doesn't have the means to act. So just very briefly, I wanted to highlight how in the last 8 to 10 years, there's have been a lot of development of regulations that is interconnecting what the governments need to do to make progress in tobacco control. Perfect. Thank you very much, Oscar. And now we would like to move to the last part of our presentation that focuses on harm reduction, which, as you know, is a resource widely used by the tobacco company to advance their interests. They, of course, have ignored human rights when advancing their economic interests. And we would like to address these particular strategies with the human rights strategies, as well as share some tools with you. We should also highlight that the health and human rights frameworks reinforce each other and have been widely developed. And we have also been able to build on a very extensive foundation. We will share with you a report by the Special Rapporteur of the United Nations on Human Rights, Dr. Talen Mokfoken. She speaks about, in this report, she speaks about how these frameworks reinforce and give feedback to each other, and how the harm reduction tool is deeply rooted in public health strategies and has been widely developed for illicit drugs. So she wonders how we can understand this public health tool in relation to tobacco, in relation to ultra-processed foods, alcohol, and other products and harmful behaviors. She also creates a framework with very interesting tools, and what she does is to build a whole narrative about the tobacco industry and how they use the harm reduction narrative to advance their interests. And the thing is, actually, these harm reduction policies require a lot of regulation.
Un comentario puntual.
And an additional comment. This is nothing new. When we began working on tobacco control back in 2006-07, human rights issue was a discourse used by the tobacco industries, human health, the Framework Convention, the impact on human rights, and they had kidnapped that, let's say, that discourse. And many organizations spearheaded campaigns on the UN to say that tobacco control and human rights go hand in hand. And now we feel that they are using the strategy with the harm reduction model, which is a useful model for public health that joins many public health issues, but they are capturing that concept for new products and have a position in the market. So the comment is to try to use the framework that is in a cohesive manner, because they can be compatible. I remember 15 years ago when we talked about tobacco control, they said that human rights were a hindrance for tobacco control, but that is not the case. So this is a parallelism between how the industry captured human rights and now what the harm reduction context is. Thank you, Oscar. So this tool, this model within the regulatory spectrum, the UN Framework Convention states, when you think about tobacco control, you have to ask yourself, what is harm reduction? And she highlights the danger of what the industry, the tobacco industry says in terms of avoiding regulation. In tobacco control context, we need to be mindful of this idea that the state should leave the private actors to do whatever they see best. So they begin working with this public health tool. And they make interesting comments that provide the framework of the emerging products as neo-colonial practices. If we think about the roots of these companies in the global north and how this creates damage and harm in different countries of the region. So it is framed under this neo-colonial context. And then they address how the tobacco industry has taken ownership of the harm reduction narrative, which is false. And then they identify what is the actual harm reduction, and they make a call on regulation, stating that the states needs to effectively regulate tobacco control. So there are different layers in this report, and this is quite a helpful tool. And we have some examples from this report, beginning that she explicitly addresses the skepticism of on initiatives by the tobacco industry, a long-standing history of deceptive campaigns. With all the historic practices of the tobacco industries about their positioning on emerging products. And she also discusses how these companies exert their power of the harm reduction narrative to seem that they are part of the solution of the problem that they have actually created. And then, as of this, in the case of tobacco, as in the case of other products and other environmental damage, we need to think of harm reduction as a regulation, not just any regulation, but a proper and efficient regulation. And then she recommends specific actions. She states that governments should adopt efficient regulations with empirical basis, not just to protect health, but also to protect the environment and to actively implement the framework convention, the WHO framework convention. That is how Oscar was saying how the human rights and the framework convention are interlinked. And then taking into account these measures that have been developed in the documents on the human rights space, of course, health warnings, the packaging, and also advertising, the issue of prices in non-smoking spaces. And these are regulations that have been discussed within the human rights perspective. When we talk about the human rights framework, we are discussing treaties and tools that have been developed at the regional and international level. But many of the countries in our region have these frameworks, domestic frameworks in their constitutions, in their legislation. So these are very useful tools to set debates in any context, from the domestic and national context to the international context. So we need to continue linking this relationship between health and human rights. So thank you, Isabel. and thank you, PAHO colleagues. I would like to emphasize the importance of using these instruments, of trying to fine-tune this space in an industry that wants to capture the harm reduction in favor of their economic and profits agenda, and how these inputs can be useful to face some of those attempts by the tobacco industry and use this as an entry point so that they can advance their agenda. So thank you, PAHO, for this space and the invitation. Thank you very much. Thank you, Isabella and Oscar, for this wonderful presentation. We would like to thank you for refreshing all this information so that it is available. It's important to refresh all of this information, the legal framework that is at our disposal to take action to protect children, the youth, from the harmful practices of these industries to hook them with this addiction. So now we'll go on with the next presentation. The title, so for the interpreters, I'll change into English.
Is entitled Digital Marketing, Tactics and Masks, the urgent call to prevent industry from promoting addiction for a new generation. This presentation will explore how the tobacco and nicotine industries use digital platforms to promote its products, focusing on design features such as flavors and packaging. For this presentation, we have Ben McCready. He leads the Public Health Law and Policy Unit in the Department of Health Promotion at the WHO headquarters. Thank you, Ben, for joining us this morning. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Dana. And yeah, happy World No Tobacco Day. And it's great to be with you. And I'm really pleased that we can share some of the material we have with a focus today, not so much on the industry behavior and how the industry is using digital marketing, but more so on what governments can do to address it. So let's jump right in. So we see here on the screen 3 different products that I want to refer to together. So you see Bright Products, Dark Intentions, the World No Tobacco Day theme, and you can see the products on the screen in the image. They're not, for the most part, conventional cigarettes or conventional products that have been sold over long periods of time. Rather, they're novel and emerging products. They're new variations of electronic cigarettes, of heated tobacco products, nicotine pouches, a variety of different products that companies are putting into the market and using digital marketing, among other methods, to capture market share and to promote these products to a new generation of consumers. And by that, we mean children. Now, I also have on the screen the WHO call to action on electronic cigarettes. And I think there's one point that I just want to stress from that and relate it back to this presentation, which is that even where countries prohibit the sale, import, distribution of particular product categories like electronic cigarettes or heated tobacco products, they should still be prohibiting the marketing of those products. So they should still be banning the advertising, promotion, and sponsorship of those products in order to ensure that, in particular, digital marketing methods are not used to still promote those products, particularly to children. And then finally, many of the issues that I'm going to mention are captured in the WHO publication on the right on restricting digital marketing. So where do we see gaps in government regulation? You see here on the screen an image, filtered but still fatal, and it refers to conventional cigarettes and the filters that we see on conventional cigarettes. We know well today that they filter the toxins in cigarettes, but that in reality they do little or nothing in order to actually reduce the harm associated with the product. Well, it's a good analogy for digital marketing in the sense that what we see online today is a sort of filtered version of advertising, promotion, and sponsorship for tobacco and nicotine products. There's an enormous amount of advertising and promotion that is still online, despite the fact that under Article 13 of the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, parties to the convention are required to implement comprehensive bans or restrictions. And when we look at national laws, there are a few reasons why we see this filtering or why we still see large gaps in the law. Some tobacco and nicotine products are simply outside the scope of national laws, as in the national laws don't address all product categories, and therefore any restriction on advertising, promotion, and sponsorship only covers some product categories. We also see in national laws still some partial restrictions that don't cover all forms of advertising, promotion, and sponsorship, and specifically that don't cover digital spaces or digital techniques. And these gaps lead to some product marketing being unrestricted under national laws, whether it's marketing of specific product categories or specific techniques. And so we call on all countries to strengthen their national laws with respect to digital marketing, also the enforcement of those laws, including the monitoring of marketing available online. And in order to do so, it's first important to ensure that the scope of application of tobacco control laws is broad enough. And we see a couple of examples here on the screen. We need a broad definition of marketing. And you see here the example from Uruguay, which includes a very wide variety of different marketing techniques. We need to ensure that the laws have a broad territorial scope. That is, that they cover marketing not just by companies inside your country, but also marketing that's incoming, that enters your territory. And we need to ensure that the laws have as broad a product coverage as possible, that they cover tobacco products and specific subcategories, manufactured nicotine products other than medicines, analogs or products that don't include tobacco or nicotine, but that have analogous chemical compounds that produce similar effects. Imitation products, they need to cover the devices, the components, and of course, accessories. So we need these very broad scope of application in national laws in order to ensure that digital marketing doesn't fall through gaps. And Isabel and Oscar in their previous presentation included some examples of the types of marketing that we're talking about. And on one of Isabel's slides, I saw the Juul vaporized campaign. Today, that is the classic example of an online campaign that drove a massive uptake in use of e-cigarettes, particularly by young people. A campaign that included advertising, so direct ads placed particularly on social media, but then also very sophisticated user engagement techniques on social media, where the company, influencers, and users promoted the product online, increasing the exposure, particularly of young people, to advertising around Juul. And of course, we saw a subsequent spike in the use of Juul by young people, and ultimately the company having to settle lawsuits alleging that it had violated restrictions on advertising. But for many countries, that type of campaign still falls within gaps in their national laws. Once our national tobacco control laws are broad enough in their scope, then it's also important to consider legislative coordination. That is, coordinating with other laws that govern advertising, data protection, consumer protection, broadcasting, telecommunications, information technology, or digital markets. And it's important to ensure this coordination because quite often those other areas of law and other government agencies have specific powers with respect to digital spaces. They have specific rules on jurisdiction, on prohibited practices, on monitoring of online environments, on liability, and on enforcement. And all of these typically need to be leveraged for purposes of restricting digital marketing of tobacco and nicotine products. And then it's increasingly important that governments take specific action with respect to digital marketing techniques. And here I very quickly mention the example of influencers and user engagement techniques. I just mentioned them a moment ago with respect to the Juul vaporized campaign, but it's essential today that in the national laws and relevant decrees, that the definition of marketing is broad enough to include influencer marketing and ideally to distinguishing between marketing and other content that is not marketing. It's important that governments directly regulate influencers, that governments regulate the platforms that influencers work on, and that governments, where necessary, clarify how general laws relating to marketing also apply to influencers. And you can see the example from Mexico on the screen. But more particularly, it's extremely important that governments regulate the advertisers themselves. So the tobacco and nicotine companies that are engaging influencers and that are using user engagement techniques online, so that the types of advertising and types of campaigns, competitions, etc., that were used in the Juul vaporized campaign and that have since been used by other products, other companies in order to launch products in the market and gain market share are not permitted on social media platforms or in other online spaces. And then once we have the sufficiently broad laws in place, it's essential that governments are engaging in monitoring. Today, it's becoming increasingly clear that there are affordable tools using artificial intelligence that can gather large amounts of material online for purposes of monitoring, advertising, promotion, and sponsorship. These are available at lower and lower cost, and more governments are using them. And it's essential that governments consider how they can monitor online environments at scale. Governments can also use disclosure obligations, whether applied to platforms like social media platforms, or to advertisers, or to both. And these can provide a resource that civil society and government can together use to analyze the material that's available online. And then finally, we need a comprehensive approach to enforcement. And this means applying the law to all actors in the supply chain, applying the law to domestic companies and those also abroad who are advertising in your market. A combination of both preventive measures and reactive measures, and sufficient sanctions to discourage companies from marketing tobacco, nicotine, and analogous products online. With the type of legislative coordination that I referred to earlier, most countries can find this full comprehensive toolkit for enforcement in their national laws, and it's really a matter of connecting the dots and the government agencies so that they're working together, pulling in the same direction and taking a comprehensive approach. So thanks very much for your interest in this subject. Along with colleagues at PAHO, we're always available to assist countries in moving this agenda forward. Thanks again, Diana. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Ben, for your presentation. It was really interesting to learn how these digital marketing and strategies are being used by the tobacco and nicotine industries to promote their products. Now I'm gonna switch to Spanish for the interpreters. Es un gusto presentar a Gustavo Soñora, director de.
It's a great pleasure to introduce Gustavo Soñora, the Regional Director of Vital Strategies for Latin America. I would like you to briefly share with us what is your perspective on the challenges to address digital marketing strategies in our region. Thank you very much, Diana. I would like to thank previous speakers, very talented speakers that have really translated very complex legislative and regulation processes to us. I would also like to thank the PAHO for inviting Vital Strategies to intervene and do a presentation here. Now, the Framework Convention represents a very important and timely opportunity to include digital marketing and media. Today, we see a very blurry limit between what is advertising and what is expression and legitimate expression of our opinion. These tobacco companies like to mask their advertising as very spontaneous expressions. And this tactic also exploits legal voids and creates tension in some constitutional principles that are in place to protect freedom of expression. And they are using these with commercial objectives to mask a commercial speech as freedom of expression. And that's how they reach this youth and children market. In the case of electronic devices to use nicotine, has a very aggressive commercialization through influencers, music, and applications that integrate these products as part of the youth lifestyle. In the Article 13 of the Framework Convention, it is highlighted how these products should be completely banned in advertising and sponsorship in local and national legislation. We need to be reminded that the correct regulations in place is not enough to regulate this activity. Cross-border channels of digital media requires also cross-border measures to reinforce the application of our legislation. Finally, I would like to insist on how these Article 13 these 13th Article guidelines are here to be implemented and fully applied to strengthen regulatory framework cooperation to go against an industry that reinvents itself with just one goal, which is to attract new clients and new consumers that will use lethal products. That's it for me. Thank you very much, Diana. Thank you, Gustavo, and thank you once again, Isabel, Oscar, and Ben, for your presentation. I feel that this section has left us with a lot of lessons to understand how the industry has many strategies to design products to target the youth and children, and how these strategies are transferred onto digital platforms to promote these products. This not only includes traditional tobacco products, but also emerging new products with nicotine and tobacco. Thank you again for reminding us of all the policies and regulations options that we have to enforce the prohibition of these products and the harm that they cause. Now, moving on to the last section of this webinar, we will have with us Janela Severini and Jaime Arcilo. Please turn on your cameras. Janela Severini represents the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, and Jaime represents corporate accountability. They will present some videos where we will see some of the strategies used by the industry in a region. This will be presented by youth in the Americas, and we will also have the opportunity to listen to what the strategies they use in order to fight back the industry. Thank you very much, Diana. Good morning, everyone. I really want to thank the PAHO for inviting corporate accountability and the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. Now we will see and watch a series of videos by the youth in the region that explains very clearly some of the strategies explained by the previous speakers. We will have some concrete examples that are targeting governments and also some strategies that will help unmask what the tobacco industry is doing in the region, targeting their products to children and the youth. Thank you very much, Jaime, and good morning, everyone. As Jaime said, it's a great pleasure to be here with you today. And I am very happy to close this section with a lot of energy, showing you some of the youth actions in the region and this very important perspective on how the industry can be regulated, how their products can be regulated, and also to understand how they have different commercial and marketing strategies that can help us pay attention to strategies and resources to use our available tools to fight back all the strategies, as well as to legitimate all the arguments that are more and increasingly important. It is also very important that government officials have the correct tools available to fight back the industry. First, we will see a video about marketing strategies, some harm reduction strategies that this industry uses to try and sell the products to the youth. Did you ever think why these products are so appealing? Behind its bright colors, sweet flavors, and cool design, a very deliberate strategy is implemented. It would be great if we could watch the video with audio. Behind the bright colors, sweet flavor, and cool design, there's a deliberate strategy by the nicotine and tobacco industry to target the youth. They design strategies that adapt to each target public in the region. In Brazil, Mexico, and Chile, tropical flavors. In Argentina, Paraguay, and Bolivia, different packaging. In Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador, fashion devices are also imitated, and also in TikTok. It's not coincidence that these tactics have been adapted to the 20th century, disguised as trends. The goal is to attract a new generation of consumers, and they are succeeding in this, while our health, lives, and communities are in risk. It is time to stop this and look beyond the packaging.
It's very important to understand the strategies of the industry, of the tobacco industry. Less than 10 transnational companies dominate the global business. They can interact and collaborate with each other to have coordinated strategies. Their actions are segmented, as you can see, in different countries. They take ownership of the culture, of the essential aspects to connect with the youth. It is key, as has already been said, to connect this with the youth. In Colombia, what we can see, it's a very aggressive campaign in terms of what they call harm reduction. But at the same time, There is a strong promotion of all their products, cigarettes, e-cigarettes, heated tobacco products, and nicotine pouches, flavored nicotine pouches. So we'll see a very short video. Marlboro advertisement. Beef. IQOS, beef. Marlboro. Well, it's very clear that if this was an actually harm reduction, it was an actual harm reduction campaign, they would not be given away. So this is clearly a marketing strategy. The industry is seeking for new consumers, new clients, because their consumers die, because we know that between half and 1/3 of the users die. And how they reinvent themselves, disguising this as fashionable products with technology, with new flavors. So this is not a true harm reduction. This is a marketing strategy. And this is how the industry wants the youth and the children to consume the emerging products, which is the entry point for traditional products. So in the next video, we will see what sort of actions have been implemented by the youth in our region to counteract this message. So that this message comes from the youth themselves. In Colombia, Peru, and Chile, we conducted workshops and created a campaign to raise awareness on the increase of taxes on tobacco. In Panama, Brazil, and Mexico, we took part of workshops and awareness campaigns. In Argentina, we conducted the Summit Volume 2, where we gather youth from leaders from the continent for training, and we had an artistic intervention. No more lies. Latin Americans only want one thing: free smoking, smoking-free, spaces through segmented marketing strategies. The youth will be kept silent, and they will act. It is very important that the youth is part of the debate, of the discussion, to promote public policies. Youth involvement is key, and it's not just a matter of being part because it is something that is trendy, because these are professional young people who can contribute a lot, not because of their knowledge, but because they are the target audience for these industries, and they know better than anyone the strategies of the industry. I agree with what you're saying, Janela. We celebrate that the youth is engaged from their own initiatives, so that it's not just an institutional element, so that the youth speaks to the youth, because the youth need to advocate for their rights against tobacco industries. This is something that needs to stem from the academia. We need to take tobacco control to the streets. Now, the last video, it's a call for action for the World No Tobacco Day. In the World No Tobacco Day, the organized youth of Latin America, we have a clear messages. The tobacco industry strategies are not mystery. No more attractive, appealing packages, no innocent flavors. Peru, Chile, Uruguay, Mexico, Argentina, Bolivia, Colombia, Panama, Ecuador, and Paraguay. The youth of Latin America are stating it's time to act, and with determination. We ask the governments to eliminate the flavors and the filters, and to regulate these products, and to eliminate the advertisement, promotion, and sponsorship of digital marketing strategies, to increase taxes, to protect smoke-free spaces, and that they support the circle, the stopping of the circle of nicotine. We are doing our part. We are organized. We research and we communicate and we act. youth for healthy environments. We are ready to build public policies, not just promises. So this call for action is key for actions in our countries to adopt legal frameworks that continue to advance in the regulation of the tobacco companies, eliminating filtering and flavoring and everything that has been mentioned with digital marketing strategies, as mentioned before, not just for smoke-free spaces, tobacco-free spaces, not just taking into account emissions of e-cigarettes, increasing of taxes, of course, and all the stopping actions, cessation actions, where we can make progress in our region. So, Jaime, I'll give you the floor to close this so that we are all filled with energy. Well, a lot of things remains to be done, but the Framework Convention has been a lifesaver for the states. We need to strengthen Article 5.3 so that the industry does not continue in this supposed transformation of supposed well-being and health, and also to move ahead with the health costs and the implementation of the Article 19 of the Framework Convention. So now let's close this up. Thank you, Janet and Jaime. We needed the end of this webinar that is so refreshing, listening to the young of our region, so that we know which actions are being undertaken and to listen directly from them to adopt measures that would protect them from the tactics of this industry. We would like to make a last attempt for the campaign of the World No Tobacco Day 2025. Let's see if technology is in our side. So let's see if you can please, Vivian, share the video. Let me see if the sound is available. No, there's no sound. No, unfortunately, technology is not on our side, because I've tried sharing sound. Let me try one more time. One more time. Yes, we have a couple of minutes left. Let me see if I can share the sound and optimizing the video. But no, I can't. I'm sorry. Okay, no problem. So we shared the link in the chat. On the official website, we'll have the recording, some of the resources that we have shared, and the link to the website of all the campaign of the World No Tobacco Day 2025, where most of us share the material of this campaign. We've seen pictures and videos of the events across the region. And we would like to seize this opportunity to thank you for your commitment, for the joint work as a tobacco control community to protect the children and the youth across our region. And as Ben was saying, as PAHO and WHO, we are at your disposal for your technical requests, technical assistance requests, so that we can offer help in the regulatory process and any other question that you may have in our countries. So thank you again. I'm Diana Cerón Diaz. I'm the regional advisor of tobacco control at PAHO WHO. I would like to give the floor to Rosa Sandoval, and with that, we'll close this webinar. Thank you, Diana. I would like to thank everyone for your participation today. We hope that this information was helpful We will meet up in the different spaces where we promote the enforcement of effective tobacco control, as Diana say. And I would like to thank our partners and friends from WHO, from Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, Corporate Accountability. And we'll meet up soon, and happy World No Tobacco Day. Thank you.